even though you've gotten out of prison, you still have to serve time. You're still going to be judged. You're going to be held accountable for that crime for the rest of your life. And I'm the first one to say absolutely not.
From the Mamma Mia podcast network, I'm Mia Friedman, and this is No Filter. Real stories that will make you lean in. How do you prepare to go to prison? And what's life like when you get there? How, as a mother, do you tell your two little girls that they aren't going to see you for anywhere up to 7 years? Kerry Tucker was jailed in 2004 for one of the biggest white-collar crimes committed by a female in Victoria. She'd been stealing money from her employers and she owned up to it, was found guilty, and she spent 4.5 years behind bars in a maximum security prison. When Kerry arrived in jail, she was utterly terrified and totally clueless about what was going to happen to her next. From sex to violence, friendships and babies and drug addiction and making cups of tea for murderers. Life is very big and very complicated on the inside. And it's also very different to the way you might imagine it to be. In fact, the most surprising part of this story is that at the end of her sentence, Kerry Tucker actually asked if she could stay in prison. This story is so interesting and you're going to love it. Kerry, tell me about the day you got arrested.
It's funny when I get asked that question because there's two different memories. I knew that I was about to be arrested, I just didn't know when. So that waiting was just horrific. I didn't know that they'd had me under surveillance for a week. One must remember that this was a really big crime in a very small town. Anywhere else they wouldn't have put me under surveillance because I wasn't a violent offender and I was certainly home with my daughters. I went to the gym and they arrested me at the gym, so that was really good. So that day, being arrested, there's a couple of things that I learnt from that because I was very compliant. I knew that I'd done the wrong thing. I wanted to own up to it. I felt if you're going to be big enough to do this sort of stuff, then own up to it and just go through the process and whatnot. But there are a lot of things that people need to realise in that as soon as I was taken back to the station, they actually said to me, if you don't confess, we're going to get 2 uniformed officers to go up to the children's school and preschool and put them in foster care. Now, there were 2 things about that was that I didn't know they couldn't do that, so it was a bluff, and I sang like a bird anyway, so I had full intentions of it, so it was sort of a moot point. But what it did make me realise is that, a lot of times when I used to sit back and think, well, police don't use these sort of tactics, I actually saw firsthand. So a lot of women that say they were treated certain ways, I can say, but that's not everyone in the police force, obviously.
Where did they take you from the gym?
Back to the police station and then back out to my house. When we got out to the house, there was this great big truck and about 8 or 9 police cars. It looked like a crime scene.
Because they were searching your house.
They were removing No, they just removed everything. They gutted it. They took everything that I had.
Why?
As restitution. I hadn't even been charged yet, let alone tried or found guilty or whatnot. I hadn't even been interviewed. So I literally was back out there. They were gutting the house.
So they took everything because they thought they might have been bought with the proceeds of crimes because you'd embezzled money from your employer.
Absolutely, yeah.
So at the time of your arrest, you had 2 little girls. How old were they?
They were 5 and 7.
And you talked about the time between knowing you'd been caught and then being arrested.
Yeah.
I've always wondered what that time is like in terms of preparing. Essentially, you knew you were going to jail?
Yes, but knowing that and actually having it happen are 2 different things. That time I was just waiting. I can remember it was like I was watching myself in the lounge room. I can still see it now if I look into my memory. Someone was watching me just sitting and waiting and going through the motions. I'd tuck the kids away with their dad sort of thing so that, if anything happened, they were with their dad, so I didn't want that used against me or to have to worry about that. The one thing that I couldn't do, and to this day it still sort of, makes me sort of a little uneasy, is I couldn't tell the girls that I was leaving them. It didn't matter how I tried to gloss it up. It didn't matter how I tried to approach it. I couldn't do it. And as fearless as I am, no, I absolutely couldn't. I left that up to, their father, my ex-husband.
You couldn't because it was too confronting for you?
Yeah. And them. Yep. I can't even talk about it. It was just so difficult. So it was that I unfortunately left up to my ex-husband. So it was easier. And I think it worked out that way better anyway, because they were eased into the thought process that I'd gone to Mildura to see the family, and then something had happened. And so, it sort of dragged out for a little while while Mummy was gone. And then we sort of moved into that having to tell them that I'm actually in prison.
You were actually at the gym to try to build up your strength, weren't you?
Absolutely,
to prepare for prison.
And again, this is what I go to a lot of pains to talk about about prison, is that in my mind it was everything from the movies. So I
Prisoner.
knew. Yes.
Did you watch Prisoner?
No, amazingly.
Oh. How old were you at this stage?
40. Well, life begins at 40, so
in one way or another.
I was just about to turn 40. I had my 40th in prison.
I've jumped ahead. I want to ask you about your first day arriving at prison. Were you so scared?
No, but one of the reasons is with the women, it backs up and you go into police holding cells around Melbourne, and as one woman is released from prison, someone from the police holding cells, in the order that they arrived, goes out to the prison. So I was there for nearly
the women's prisons are full?
Always. In fact, they've just built...
That's probably a whole other question.
Yes, it is, yeah. They've just built another block of cells out there as well.
So you spent how long in the holding cells?
3 weeks, at least. That was horrific because the police holding cells are run by the police. Now, there's a big difference between police and corrections officers, because the police are the police and the corrections officers are civilians that have done a 6-week training course. The police's job is thankless, and I absolutely understand that and respect it. And in the Moorabbin holding cells, I was treated very, very well, except for a female officer there. But, it's a really hard place. It's all concrete. You can't wear, socks. You can't wear shoes. They used to just hose it out with a fire hose at 6 o'clock in the morning. This was winter, and it was, the blankets women had lice. Everyone was menstruating. It was just dreadful. And if you needed pads or tampons or whatever, you had to ask an officer and they'd bring you one. They didn't just put it in the cell for, it was just horrible.
So quite dehumanising.
Yep. And I was in there with some old school heavies,
What does that mean?
They'd been to prison 100 times and they knew all the people that needed to be known, They were movers and shakers, they, and sort of mucked with a lot of these,
Did
girls.
they look as scary as you making them sound?
No, because it's hard, because some of them had, lots of tats and whatever else. So that was a bit confronting to me, which I always assigned as being tough. But they were also going through withdrawal, so I saw their vulnerabilities as well,
Because a lot of them were taking drugs.
Yeah, they were all heroin addicts, So then they were going through withdrawal, so they was about as sick as you can be, And so I saw both sides of that. And I've always wondered when I was in there that they could be so weak and so sick, yet still worry about how I was going, because I was a newbie. I was, and that showed me a lot about the women and how women tend to look after each other.
Were you the only white-collar criminal in those holding cells?
Yes, yeah. And they knew straight away,
The nails gave it away?
Well, and I just didn't have the appearance of being a street criminal, so to speak. And
were you still in your activewear, Kerry?
Yes, I was, actually. Yes, I was. They thought I'd been done for shoplifting. I was one of these, privileged women that, that still needed something in their life. And I was like, no.
The women that you were in the holding cell with, what kind of things were they there for?
All on drugs, drug charges. One was on a violent, a road rage thing, I think. But they were all related to being addicted to drugs, so whether it be robbery, there was a fight on a platform or something over drugs and whatever, generally drugs. And you'll find that with most women in a greater majority of women in prison. And it's such a sad thing because they don't want to be drug addicts, But I've put this question a lot out there in the sense that if you've lived the lives that they have lived and then they end up being drug addicts, they're victims before they become perpetrators. And that's not an excuse, it's a fact. It's a researched fact. And most, as opposed to men, they don't know they're aggressors, They'll get into a drug feud or a turf war or something like that, and they don't generally have an intimate relationship. Whereas women, they more often than not have an intimate or had a relationship with their aggressors, their violent, perpetrator. And that person's probably told them, I love you, at least once in their life. And that could be the rapist father. It could be the domestic violence husband or partner. It could be, the brother, the priest, this, that and the other, And a lot of the girls are then, they're victims of incest or rape or sexual abuse. Then they're turfed out on the street. As soon as they start talking about it, they get onto drugs. Then they have to commit crime. And they're more of a nuisance to society than they are a threat to society. And while I was in prison, there were no specialist programs for individual rape, incest. There wasn't even domestic violence programs when I was there.
I can't imagine how many women in prison are
just
victims
about everyone.
of sexual abuse or domestic violence.
A very small minority aren't. And they're the true criminals in my mind.
When you arrived in prison, what was your experience? I mean, after the holding cells, was it like arriving at a Bali resort?
Totally. Totally. Except the prison had been locked down and then by the time we got, it takes a long time to be processed into a prison. So it was dark. And we were escorted over to this unit. Now, at the time, I didn't know what unit was what, and I was put into a disabled cell because, again, the prison was full. It had a doona and it had a pillow and it had a shower where you didn't have to keep pushing the button, and it had shampoo. And I was like, oh, my God, this is what heaven is going to be like, And then the next morning, the most terrifying thing that you can do is when they come around and they open the doors to let you out. They let everyone in the prison out. I had no idea what was on the other side of that door. I didn't know what was prison. As much as I'd come from the police holding cells and I was sort of rough and ready, now, I didn't know what the big girl school was like. And as I opened that door, I can remember standing there at the door going, just do it, just do it. And so I pushed it open a little bit and this giant woman just pulled the doors off the hinges and said, "G'day, my name's Robin, let's go for a walk." And I was like, and she was twice my size. And I'm like, yep, I was, I agreed with her. I was a very agreeable person all of a sudden. And I said, off we go. And we walked outside and she said, "This is Bomber." And I looked at Bomber and I realised it wasn't because she followed Essendon Football Club. And then there was Sparky, and Sparky wasn't an electrician. So she turned around and she said, Bomber likes to threaten, she blows up airports and things like that and judges and things, and Sparky lights big fires and things like that. And I was like, and I was onto the fact. I went up to one of the officers and I said, I'm not sure, call me old-fashioned, but I'm starting to suspect that I'm in the unit for the criminally insane. And she just sort of looked at me and she said, "What makes you think that?" And I looked over and I said, "That woman over there's drawn a face on her pillow and she's talking to her." And I said, "I don't know, I'm just suspicious. Call me old-fashioned." And she said, "Yeah, no, you are." She said, "It's just that," and I went, "Am I insane?" Because apparently only the insane people don't know they're insane. So I thought, am I one of them?
Oh, my goodness.
And they said, "No, look, the other place is full. You're just going to be here for a couple of days." And so that was my introduction to prison. And again, after that, working that out and sort of getting to know people and putting your face out there as the new person, or, and then the wonder, because it's such a place that doesn't change. So as soon as you see new faces, that's the only thing in your world that changes. So you've got to just get in amongst it.
You're in a high maximum security women's prison. Why maximum security?
Because there's such a small population of women in prison, in Victoria anyway. There's a maximum security prison. You only need one prisoner in there to be maximum security for the whole place to be maximum security. The only other place we have is Tarrangower, and it's minimum. It's not medium, it's minimum, and it's right out towards Bendigo.
But I would have thought you would have been minimum security. I mean, it was.
You have to be sentenced first.
A white collar crime.
Yeah, but you have to be sentenced first. So I was on remand for 18 months. So while you're on remand, you're maximum security. And it's
What does remand mean? The part between being charged and being sentenced?
Yeah, you're in prison awaiting your trial.
Okay.
So
no bail for you?
No. And so they hold you because they have enough evidence to support going to trial. It's how long your trial gets to go to court. And on the bigger cases, it's usually 18 months to 2 years. So your maximum security. The minimum security prison has no fences. So only people on very short sentences that if they, they're not going to run the risk of running away. You wouldn't put someone up there on murder, on 20 years because they'll run. So you've only got this one prison that holds everyone. So everyone in it is maximum security, even though once I was sentenced I could have gone to Tarrengower, but I didn't want to. I had a really important role at the maximum security prison. And to me it wasn't maximum, it was just my prison.
How is it different from what you expected?
Because it's a funny place as well. Once you settle in and you know where you stand, I sussed that out very, very quickly. I have a good, intuition and whatnot. I'm also very interested in women. I was also very much one of them. I never set myself aside from them, whether it was a drug crime, whether it was murder, whether it was whatever. I was right in there with them, So I didn't. Sometimes in prison, white collar people can tend to separate themselves and go, well, I didn't harm anyone and I didn't do this and that and the other. And because you don't actually get your hands dirty, that's
not with those nails.
That's a surefire way of getting the compound to turn against you, So I was very much a part of them. And I liked a great deal of the women. Some of them I couldn't stand, but...
Like any group of people.
Yeah, exactly. That's my point. But it's I liked the vast majority of women. And once they come off their withdrawal and they come off their drugs and whatever else, that's when they really need help, because that's when reality for them really sort of settles in. And, so I liked the women.
Did you have to suspend judgment?
That's a good question, because sometimes yes and sometimes no. The amount of women that come in that, of a crime and a big crime, whether it be murder or attempted murder, on partners, that to me just was water off a duck's back.
You describe tending to one person who arrives, because you sort of greeted the new arrivals.
Always, yeah.
And she just stabbed her partner like 20 times. And as you were just sort of not processing her, but kind of easing her into making sure she was okay and settling her in, she was just telling you about her crimes, and you were just like, yep, okay.
I remember that. I was trying to make her a cup of coffee and she was sort of like, she was just sitting there and this is what tended to happen, is that it'll be the first time that they can confess about something or get it off their chest. Not so much confess, but get it off their chest is probably a better way of saying it, because they know they're around someone who cares. I've made that very up front. They also know that I'm not going to say anything. I'm one of them. I'm not, and no one will listen to me anyway. And I don't care. They've got a due process that they can go through. So, but sometimes people want to do that. They feel the need that they can talk to someone that they can trust. They don't even know their lawyers by that stage. So, and I remember she was sitting there, and I think it's the first time, because the crime of stabbing him was only about 5 hours old. So she'd been caught, taken through the police system, which is very non-individual, sort of, and then brought out here. So I was the first person. And when she sat down next to me, I said to her, sweetheart, you're fine. You're safe. You're safe here. We women are going to look after you, and it's okay. I need you to know that so that you can then relax and we can start working on where you're going to go. Have you got kids? Tell me about your kids, that sort of stuff. And that can bring a whole new wave of safety. Because sometimes it's safer on the inside than it is on the outside, because the outside is where the crimes are committed. On the inside, we're dealing with broken people themselves. But I'd heard it so many times, and I remember I was trying to. She just wasn't cooperating in getting this coffee made for her. And I was
like, do you want sugar or not?
Yes, and she's like, then I stabbed him, and I could hear this noise in his chest, and then I'd be like, right, sorry. Did you want milk in that coffee? And she said, yeah, I'll have the milk. I said to her, oh, okay, so sorry. You were stabbing him and you heard noises, like, you just pick up from there and off we go. And it wasn't until one of the officers said to me, Jesus, and then I started thinking, okay, maybe this is becoming just too common. It's becoming too common for me. So those sort of crimes I never ever had any judgment. There are a couple of people that I did have judgment on, absolutely, but that was because I absolutely did not like them their heart, their soul, or whatever. And that's just part and parcel of a community of women. I didn't have any judgment at all.
What about the place in prison of women who are there for harming or killing their kids?
That's in protection from protection. So you've got protection, which is generally where women go if someone on the compound, on the main part of the prison, is a threat to them. And it will always be if someone has testified against another prisoner. So you might have two women that have done the same crime, and one is staying, quiet, and the other one goes, it was her. So that's the worst thing that can happen in a criminal world, so they'll go to the protection, or what they call the boner. So they'll go to protection for that. People that have sexually abused their kids and whatnot go to another area that's within that and even smaller, and that's protection from protection, because the women that have sexually abused their kids
or harmed their kids.
Yeah. And the women that are in protection anyway, they're still just normal crims that have given somebody else up, but they still have opinions about women harming children. So they needed
Hang on, I don't understand. Let's just go back. So the women who've harmed their
kids,
children,
yep.
Are they in a separate place?
Yes, but they're in where we were. There's a protection building, and there's the protection prisoners off to the right, and then off to the left are they're segregated again. Because the women in protection still have issues with them, let alone the ones.
So they're the lowest of the low.
Absolutely.
In pretty much every men's
everywhere,
and women's prisons.
And particularly in women as well, because all of the women see themselves in those tormented kids. They've all been sexually abused. 90% or probably more have been sexually abused as a child, so they know what it's like. And then this woman comes in saying that this is what they've done to their child. They see themselves in those children, and it's just it's just the worst.
So they're quarantined from the rest of the prison
Yep.
population.
Oh yes, and when they're moved, the entire prison will be locked down. Everyone will be taken back to their cells or to their cottages or whatnot and locked down, because if they're if there's any prisoners out on the compound when these women are on the compound, they'll kill them.
What do you do for sex?
Well, it depends. I'm heterosexual and I wasn't about to. It didn't interest me. Women can go without if they need to. Younger women, of course, there were ones that had that come in that were gay and got into relationships with other women that were gay, which is fabulous, but that always ends in tears because someone gets released before somebody else, and then there's those expectations. The younger girls, it was just a sex
fluid.
Yep, gay. But and that's because women, a lot of the women that were having, a lot of the older women from say 30 on that were having relationships with other women, it was more about the companionship, about the affection. It was the first time that they'd actually, because I used to say, why change? Why, and that's what it was about, wasn't it? The companionship and that, not having the crap built out of you, I guess. So, it's very complex situations when it comes to, you get a lot of girls that come in that are, 21, 22, and they come and upset the balance of stable gay relationships in there. They come in and just put a hand grenade amongst it, and that causes a lot of issues, So
there are no conjugal visits with...
No.
And no sleeping with guards?
No.
I've been watching too much Orange is the New Black.
Yes. The American prisons are quite different, but no. At Tarrengower there are, because they have the little family units, and that's what it's for. Tarrengower is also good for women that are coming off 20-year sentences. They'll send them up there for the last 3 years, or 2 years, so that they can slowly, because reintegrating back into the community is a huge thing to be faced with. But, I know I was. I can't imagine after 15, 16, 17 years, particularly as an older woman, So, but we certainly didn't have, this is a maximum security prison. So, maximum everything.
Early on, you describe a conversation you had to have with your daughters on the phone when you had to tell them you couldn't come home and they couldn't understand why, and they were very distressed. They were 5 and 7 when you were initially arrested.
Yep.
How do you stay being a mum and stay connected to your children for those formative years when you're in prison?
Oh, look, it's the hardest thing ever, I think that might have been when I was in the visit centre. when, and watching the first visit I had with the girls, and they come racing in, and, their little arms and legs, just hang off you, and then seeing them walked out of the visit centre with two burly corrections officers, and to them they were like policemen, and they're yelling out, well, come with us, mummy, come with us. It still breaks my heart today. It just, it just breaks my heart. So trying to remain relevant in their life was the thing that fueled me, because I always knew that I was going to get over the crime in a sense, and I don't mean that in any disrespectful way, but I knew that I would be able to move through that. But to get my daughter's respect back and whatnot, I knew I had to do something much bigger than my sentence, so that I could eclipse all of that, and for them to say that they're proud of me. From that moment to that moment, I had to do something major because, for the girls to be able to do that. We had 6-minute phone calls, so 6 minutes with each child, 12-minute phone calls, and it cuts off. There are automated phones out there, and I had 2 a week. So when they're 6 and 7, I'd have 6 minutes with each child, and 3 minutes into it, they still haven't said a word.
Yeah.
You there? You okay, sweetheart? Are you this?
Yeah.
They might be crying.
School? Yep. Good.
And then they'll just start to open up, and you've got to say, "See up, put Shannon on, Sarah, Sarah's crying." It's just, I didn't do anything wrong in prison, but I would have absolutely sold my soul for a mobile phone, because I would have done anything.
Do some women have them?
No. Some women, stupidly enough, brought them in, and they bring them in vaginally.
Yeah.
So I'll never forget one day, we didn't end up putting it in the book, but one woman had just arrived, and then we had a dog squad raid, from the police, and we were standing out in line, and then they run the dogs over you to see.
Did that happen often?
Yeah. Yep.
What were they looking for?
Drugs. Anything. It was a routine sort of thing.
So vagina is the way people would smuggle things in and out of the prison.
Yep. And one woman can bring in a shitload of drugs.
Really?
Vaginally. Oh,
I suppose you can get a baby out of there.
Yes, that's exactly right. Totally. So, and this woman had brought in a tiny little mobile phone, hadn't thought it through, because it started ringing.
In her vagina.
Yeah. And the dog squad are walking along with the dogs, seeing if we've got drugs. And next minute there's this mobile phone. We could just hear it. And I'm like, oh my God. And I looked and I said, is that your vagina ringing? It's like, it was, yeah. And
put it on flight mode.
It was
next
hilarious.
Time.
It was hilarious. It was like, you didn't think that one through, did you? And, some of those things were just, there were some really funny times in there as well. But so most of the drugs, because you're going to prison, doesn't mean that you're going to stop taking drugs. You're an addict, and an addict is an addict is an addict. You get more drugs in prison than anywhere else. Because that's how it is. That's how it works. Everyone's an addict. They don't want to go through the withdrawal, and also being in prison is enough for you to probably take drugs as well.
You've sat with a lot of people going through withdrawal.
Absolutely, yeah.
What's
and
it
it's
like?
Horrific. It's horrific. They have diarrhea. They can't get off their bed. So the obvious, happens. The sweating. Some of them I thought were going to have a heart attack. And they were some of them were like 45, 46, 47 kilos. They were. And it was just wretched. It breaks your heart, And one of the first things I did was able to get cordial. I'd go up, because everything's rationed, so I'd sneak up to the kitchen and get the girls up there, and we'd steal extra cordial to take it, and I'd scamper back down to, the remand unit with Mahal, and give them, generally straight cordial just to get some sugar into their system. It was just terrific. People really don't understand that, why they would want to not go through withdrawal,
It sounds like you had such purpose.
I did.
When you were in prison.
Yeah, I did, and I think it also too was it was also a distraction from me, from my children, trying to just sort
you were
of
mothering the other women.
Yeah, and I was one of the healthiest there, and I could do this. Other girls, they might have wanted to have, but they couldn't. Either they didn't have the vocabulary or the education, or they were sick, or for whatever reason. It just happened to be that there was a gap, and I happened to be there. One of the other things I did with the girls too was that we've all got a good sense of humour, the girls as well, and so I'd get a card each day from the canteen, and I got a programs officers to get me some joke books, kids' joke books, and each day I'd write in the card, and I sequenced them so that, there was this ongoing fluid connection. So I'd say, one card each, I'd go, "Dear Shannon, today I thought of you 100 times." And then I'd put a joke in it. And then I'd do the same for Sarah. And then the next day I'd tell them what the answer to the joke was, and I thought of them 101 times, right up until it was 1,600 times a day that I was thinking of them. Wow. And they've still got all of those, I didn't realise it until about 12 months ago. They've still got all the boxes of cards, yeah.
So was that really like trying to parent
from a
distance and trying to stay in their lives?
Trying to stay in their lives. I couldn't parent. And it got to the point too where, they were talking, their lives were moving on, and so naturally. So when they would come and talk to me about people, I didn't know them, they were new friends, they were new. So I just wasn't interested in that side of things, because in prison it's about the actual tangible connection, physical connection of me and my girls. When they started talking about stuff on the outside, I couldn't even visualise who they were or what they were or where they come from or whatever. So to me, they just weren't relevant. And it also showed how much I was missing out on, So when they come to see me, I just wanted to sit and talk to them and just be with them and, be in that moment with them. So there's a disconnection there as well, because I just didn't know who they were talking about,
Some of the women in there have arrived pregnant.
Yep.
And what happens if you give birth in jail? How does that go?
Well, it depends. Most of the women that arrive that are pregnant, the fair majority, when I was there anyway, were drug users. So the child was born addicted. Where possible, the child will be kept with the mother. And so the mother...
Even if they're born addicted?
Yep, absolutely. The mother will be taken into the hospital, she'll give birth, she'll come back out, and then she'll go back in each day to see the child where needed or stay in there with them. Once she's okay, Bub will usually stay on a little bit longer because they're addicted. But the prison will take the mother in and out and whatnot. And then the baby will come back unless there's any, unless she's been convicted of a violent crime, unless there's been child offences beforehand, unless DHS are involved, that sort of stuff. Taking out all of that, the child will come back to the prison with the mother. And in my mind, I still stand by the fact that a child should be with its mother so long as it's safe. A child should be with its mother. Because I know with my daughters, the love of a child, as you know, can never, ever be touched, but the bond can absolutely be broken. And that's never good for anybody because, and particularly for the child. So the child needs to know that and have that connection with its mother for the whole time. The hidden victims of all of these are children that think that their mothers abandoned them, and that's worse than their father abandoning them, I believe, because that mothering, nurturing side, if it's lost when they're younger, it gives them the opportunity and the vulnerability to then enter into relationships like that where they feel rejected, where they're not worth it.
What was the narrative your girls were told about where you were and why you were there?
We were honest with where they were and with why I was there. And they started visiting me at the prison pretty early on. After a while, they got used to it. And I don't think... The funny thing is now... Yeah, so they got used to it, The hard part was as I said, I couldn't, say I'm not coming home next week. I'm not coming home next month. I'm not coming home for years,
Oh, that's impossible for kids to think like that,
totally.
Isn't it?
So what I do, and it was just by default, but because I didn't master plan this sort of thing, but it worked out better, was drip feed them a little bit at a time. Hopefully after Christmas, the judge will tell me when Mummy can come home, even though I knew it was going to be, I'd do it in 6-month stints, and at the same time they were sort of moving along a little bit as well. It was so difficult.
They were living with their dad.
Yeah, and it was so and he was terrific. I was so fortunate that they had a father that they could live with that tended to them while the mother was away. So it was really quite difficult for them to understand, particularly why Mum isn't there. But after a while, they just got used to it. And I was only talking to Sarah, who's 21 tomorrow, about this the other day, and she said, she just doesn't remember. And I think that's something that she just probably doesn't want to remember because she remembers things prior to that. So, but it's nice to know that, these are two very strong really well, disciplined, really well organised, really responsible young women. I'm very, very, very lucky that it hasn't been generational. So,
you got a lot done in the prison. You wrote a book.
The children's book was, I noticed a lot of women weren't seeing their kids. And again, I go to great pains to say that women in prison do it tough, and anybody that says anything different, it doesn't know. And they're not an authority on it, because they absolutely do. And, women from domestic violence are used to accepting blame. It's always their fault. So, that's they just get on with it. They're tough and they just get on with it. But they weren't seeing, a lot of them weren't seeing their kids, And again, it's not the women saying, I'm their mother, I've got every right to see my kids, blah, blah, blah. I've heard it all before. It's the children's right to see their mother. A child will visit their mother wherever they are and still love them. They'll usually be, they won't even know what's around them. So that was what it was about. It was trying to let everybody know that the prison is a safe place to visit children, for children to come to. The officers are fantastic, they talk to the kids, I was talking to your mummy the other day, so it gives the kids this thought that mummy's safe and she's in another community just for a little while. It's not necessarily a prison, so to speak. The visit centre, Brendan Money was the general manager when I was there. He went to great pains to make sure that it was brightly coloured, it had games, it had toys, we could get photos taken with the kids, so it was a really vibrant, place to be. And my ex-husband had issues as well, because, and understandably so, we had never been involved in the prison system before. He thought that the kids would come into the main compound and wander around and have barbecues with the armed robbers. And that I took offence with, because everyone knew that you didn't invite the armed robbers for the barbecues, because they always knocked off the meat. They seriously. So I wasn't having a part of that. So I thought we'll have to write a book and educate people, so that when, for instance, my ex-husband or someone that's going to prison, we can get the book. Lawyers can give the book to the mum or the dad, and it's a colouring book, and it steps through a visit that Shannon and Sarah have with me, and it'll say the dog squads come in, and the dogs are really friendly, but they're working, so you can't touch them, so that when the children come in, they know what to expect. And then, Shannon took $5 in coins and went and got some drinks from the drink machine, so we can let them know what to expect, what's available, but in a very friendly way, and they can colour it in so the kids are part of this interacting before they even get there. So, and it was still in operation today. It's in all the law firms and legal aids and whatnot. It was a really, really, really good thing to do. I enjoyed it.
One of the photos that I liked most in your book that I pored over was of your cell.
Oh, yeah.
Can you describe that? Because there's so much, myth around what a prisoner's cell might look like.
Well, the one that's in the book is in the cottages, but initially I was in the remand unit, which is a single cell. Now, if I stood, I did it many times, if I stood and walked the length of my cell, it's 15.5 of my feet long, and I'm about a 7.5 shoe. So,
of your feet, but not on the steps, 15.5, like
feet, back
toe to heel.
Toe to heel. Yep. So 15.5 long, and if I stood in the middle of the cell and outstretched my arms and just moved a little to the right and the left, I could touch the walls on the other side.
Is it one person per cell?
Yep. Now, in that room, you've then got a bed on a slab of concrete, you've got a shower, you've got a toilet, and you've got a desk. So there's only about, 3 or 4 feet of width that you can walk, and then you've got barred window, not barred so to speak, but
security.
Reinforced windows that look out onto the razor wire. It's quite a treat. In the book, when you move up to the cabins, and therefore because you can't, I was in that cell. Usually you're in that cell for about 2 to 3 months. It's a settling cell, but it was in the remand unit. I was in it for 14 months because I was doing my work down at the
greeting.
So I decided I'd stay there. I was quite comfortable. I didn't need anything. I was, when you move up to the cabins, because you can't have a woman in a single cell for 20 years. They'll go insane. You just can't do it. So the cottages up in the top end of the prison are for women doing long, long sentences. And because I was a peer educator and I was the youngest sort of nearly 5 years in sentences up there.
You talk about the age of your sentence. So
Yep.
you're 4 or 5,
Yep.
so you're young, and someone's old if they're 20 or 30.
Yeah, so what happens is you go up to the cabins and you'll have 5 bedrooms, 3 showers and a toilet at the back of it's still within the cabin, the cottage.
So it's like a share house?
It's absolutely. But it's built out of big Besser blocks, concrete Besser blocks. And the front and the back door are all that's locked at night because you don't have toilets in your cells now. So we're free to walk around the unit as much as we want.
And your cell looked tiny.
Yeah, it's but it was bigger than the one in the remand unit.
So when you say you were free to walk around, like,
It's
not a slumber party though.
Oh no, I could walk out of my unit and out of my cell,
Yeah.
and go out into the lounge area or make a cup of coffee or whatnot. But in a lockdown cell, you can't. You'll make your coffee in your cell, and that door's shut until the next morning. So there's a lot more movement up in the cabins, but they have to be because you're up there for 20 years, sort of thing. But that brings its own set of complexities as well, because women that are up there for 20 years often like to take over the cabin because, my sentence is the longest time. This is the way I like the cabin to be run, and this, that and the other, and blah, blah, blah. So, and then there's who do you live with? You can't have someone in there that's incompatible because you hopefully you'll be living with this person for maybe 5 years.
So who makes those decisions?
The women in the unit generally. The officers will come on board if we need that to do, but we would generally scout our own.
Tell me about a day in the life.
Well, it's Groundhog Day every day. 7:45, the compound puts out announcements to be up and ready, dressed and ready for muster. And muster is where the officers go round every single cell or door or unit. They'll open up the front door and come in, and you've got to be standing by the door, and they'll count you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And just to make sure no one's escaped, do a head count. That's it,
Every
morning, every lunchtime, every middle of the afternoon, and at night. There's 4 counts every day without fail. Doesn't matter what's happening. There's a count at those times.
So you have to be up at 7:45.
Yep.
Where's breakfast?
Well, it depends. If you're in the remand unit, the girls will, from the kitchen will bring it down because you can't cook for yourself. So they'll bring it down to the units. We could, cook for ourselves because it's a cabin. So we'd order the food from the kitchen on, I think it was at the time $33 per woman a week. And then someone in the cottage does all the ordering.
What's the food like in jail?
Look, the women, I think it's very cheap.
You can do your own cooking?
In the cabins you can, yeah. But the women in the kitchen are prisoners as well. They do all the cooking there as well. So they look after their own, and it's actually pretty good. It's the meat and sort of stuff that I think would be fairly cheap. It's not, but you get used to that. I would not. It wasn't bad food, and because it's cooked by the girls, who have at at one stage been in the remand unit who are being cooked for, it's pretty damn good, I think, yeah.
And so you have breakfast, then what do you do?
And then it's medication time. So because so many women are on medication, whether it be to ease their withdrawal from anxiety, depression, bipolar, you name it, just mental health issues, for a start.
Cholesterol medication,
anything.
Heart meds for the older women, all kinds of things.
Everything. So you line up at that, and you line up. The nurse has your file. They give you the medication. The officers check your mouth so that you haven't stored it to sell to somebody else, which is often the case. And that could go for quite some time, and then you've got to go to work. And this is something that I object to. Because prison and your sentence, one can never, ever trivialise a prison sentence. So I hear people say, oh, she just got 2 years or she got 3 years. That is 2 or 3 years. But what comes with that is huge. Everything else around you becomes this big black hole that everything falls into. Relationships, children, family, careers, all that sort of stuff. So it's not just, plus you are exiled totally from the outside world, So that's fair enough, And I think, you've got to sort of understand that there's so much more than just a sentence, So when you're in prison then, I don't think it should be a double sentence where you've got to work for $5 a day on menial, silly tasks. To me, it should be a program prison. As soon as that women get their medication, they then go to a cooking class, because most women can't cook for their children. They've never cooked because they're drug addicts.
So I want to ask you what the menial, silly tasks are.
Well, the first thing I think of was when I first got there, and I don't think they do it now, but when I first got there, it was sanding chairs. It was chairs that were made from wood, and we'd have to hand sand them so that they could be sent off to IKEA or whatever else. You spend 8 hours hand sanding a chair, in a stinking hot shed for IKEA or whatever, when you could have all of these women instead doing a program on sexual abuse, domestic violence, parenting programs, how to look after, nutrition for themselves and their children that they've never had and all that sort of stuff, education, you name it. So, but no, this is what they do. The Anzac Day badges, all women prisoners, all female prisoners. So whenever you see an Anzac Day badge, women sit in sheds that are about 45 degrees, because it's done over January. It starts in January, the hottest time of the day. And all they do is get the little cards, they get the pin, and they just pin it onto that card. That's all they do for 8 hours in the hottest temperatures possible. It's great for the Anzac Day legacy. Don't get me wrong, I get that. But it's such a waste when we have broken people in there, Even so, just gardening, jobs such as gardening, when there isn't any grass.
You got a degree. How did you do that?
My Master of Arts I did in prison. There was a Japanese woman come in, and she was doing her Master of Arts through Swinburne University, and she said, well, I want to continue to do it. And she sort of fought her own little fight, and then they agreed and said, well, okay, well, why don't we, why can't she do it? Let's and we thought she was going to be there a lot longer. So they come out and said, well, and then they picked 4 of us that had a reasonable education and said, do you want to do it as well? And we were like, yep. So there were 5 of us. One sort of did a year and got her grad cert, I think. The rest of us went through and did the full masters. And it was the first, no one thought we'd do it.
When did you study? When did you do all of that?
At night. That was the only time I could study, because out during the day
you had to work.
I was literally, my job was going from place, settling people in and getting them clicked in with programs and writing to their kids and all that sort of stuff. So, and I really enjoyed that, and so I'd do it at night or on the weekends because prison is an operational sort of thing where weekends it sort of closes down as well. All the programs, education, everything's shut. So weekends you have a lot more time to be able to do that sort of stuff, Plus, when people say, prisoners get these benefits and whatnot, it's absolutely not. I've got a HECS debt from my masters. I did it exactly the same way as any other person out in the community. I didn't take anyone's position there. And I'll go as far as to say that we did it damn well. We didn't have the internet. We weren't allowed to use the internet. So our tutor used to bring out reams and reams and reams and reams of paper. The problem with that was that we couldn't keep it in our cell for more than a week because it became a fire hazard. If that caught fire, the doors are double locked, So we had a great incentive to make sure that our homework was done each week, or we'd just miss out. So Swinburne brought the entire
course to you.
Yeah, absolutely, and we all passed very well, actually. And then they brought the first graduation out to a prison.
The photos of that in your book are just beautiful.
Yes, it was. And look, and they were humble enough to come out and so respectful of the fact that they come out. They were searched. They went through the whole procedure. These are professors and vice chancellors and whatnot. They brought all the regalia out for us, like the
robes and the gowns.
Yes. A lot of officers came in on their days off. It was fantastic. The women in prison were just over the moon for us, because it was like, someone succeeded. That's what they want. They want to see that people can actually really make a difference. Maybe it'll be them. So it was fantastic. It was really good. The Japanese woman was released not long after we all got this going anyway, but and I think she can finish hers as well. I'm not quite sure.
So you spent almost 5 years in prison. Your girls were now 10 and 12.
Yeah, something
around that age. Yep. It was time to get out. You must have been elated.
No. No, I wasn't. No. In fact, I cried. The closer I got to leaving, the more frightened I got. And I actually went to the general manager and said, "Can you stop this? Can you just keep me here?" And he was like, "What? Never. No one has ever said that to me before." And I burst into tears because he'd invested so much in me that I felt like I was betraying him by leaving, and I'd miss him. He was a genuinely lovely man that had a really good heart, was a good leader, and I just didn't want to go. You know, how was the place going to survive without me? You know, it was literally, that's how I felt, you know, and I was in a place where I was respected. I'd earned a lot of my integrity back. I mattered.
You had status.
Yeah, and then I was going out.
Self-respect.
Yeah, and I was going out, you know, because just before I got out, the girls came out and visited it, because I was sort of like, Mummy's going home, thinking, you know,
the world
the world had stopped for me in there, but it had gone on for them. I just thought that they were just sitting doing the same thing. Can't wait. They came out and went, we don't get mad, Mum. You know, I'm like, and they said, we don't want to live with you when you come home. And
okay,
yeah, and I actually literally physically felt I'd been kicked in the stomach.
I feel like I just got punched in the stomach.
And I was like, but I had to hold it together, because I had to really, really listen to what they were saying. You know, this is huge for them. And then I realised they're frightened that I'm coming home, you know. And it was this, so I didn't want to go home even more, you know.
When you say frightened of the unknown?
Of the instability. Is Mum going to do this again? Is she going to, you know, end up in prison and away from our lives again, you know? God knows what their father was saying. I don't know. You know, it was
You'd split up by this time.
Oh, yeah. Yep. And, you know, so I didn't know, but I just had to understand that, you know, they were frightened because they didn't trust me. And I was just, you know, going along thinking, here we are, you know, and then boom. And I was like, okay, right. I've got to actually find a place for this to sit, because when I got out, the biggest problem getting out is where do I fit now? Where do I, you know? And unfortunately, the community still believe that, a lot of people in the community still believe that even though you've gotten out of prison, you still have to serve time, you know, that you're still going to be judged, you're going to be held accountable for that crime for the rest of your life. And I'm the first one to say absolutely not. You know, you pay, we have to have a judicial system in our community where you pay for your crime and then you move on, you know, and that's how it has to be. Otherwise, we need to just get people to go before the judge, get tried, and take them out the back of the court and shoot them.
I would have thought straight away, okay, come on, Kerry, be a corrections officer and get back in there.
I've got a criminal record. I'd love to.
Can't you do that?
No. And the other thing too
Can you work in the prison in any capacity?
No, not with a criminal record.
But that's crazy.
Yeah, I know. I would love to. There's no doubt about that. But there's also different levels of that as well, you know, because what I was doing, I was one of them. When we went back and filmed Australian Story, we actually went into the prison, and as soon as I appeared, some of the girls in the medical centre were going, Kerry, can you pop down to A5 and see me? Can you? And I couldn't even go near them because I'm now a civilian. So and they're looking, thinking, why aren't you coming down the end of the hall to talk to me?
Because you weren't allowed.
No, because I was now not one of them. So I'm sort of trying to go, and I'm thinking to myself, God, she doesn't even know that I'm not even here. I'm not even a prisoner anymore. So it was, there's that disconnect again. But that wouldn't take long, you know. It just depends. Corrections might see that, you know, am I on their side or am I on, you know, correction side sort of thing. You know, there's an allegiance there. So I don't know.
What happened after you got out?
I
Had the world changed much?
Yeah. Oh yeah. It was We had the barbecue the day before, you know. That's what you do when you leave prison. Everyone gets together, and I'd made a point of making sure that the officers were invited as well, because and of course people are like, well, I'm not going, and I'm like, well, fair enough, but you know they've been here longer than you have, sweetheart, so they're coming, you know, and then we'll walk to the gate and off we go. So you walk to the gate, you know, crying of leaving this community. You walk through and get into your civilian clothes and outside into your family's arms, and you're smiling. You know, it's a very difficult thing. And
who was there to greet you?
A couple of my sisters and nephews and odds and sods. You know,
not your girls.
We'd had issues with that, my ex-husband and I, and I'd waited. You know, they were the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, and here I was at the end of the rainbow, and they weren't there. He felt that it would be best that I saw them a couple of days after I got out. And, you know, again, I had no input into that. So fitting in with them was a big thing. I remember going and seeing them day 3. The other thing too is that when I met all of my family too, there were a lot of people that I hadn't seen for a little while. It wasn't so much that, but they all had. People were talking about these people and these kids and these. They were new members of the family. Like I was the odd one out of my own family. I didn't even know who they were talking about. She married, your nephew, and
And that's you. Then they had a baby.
Yeah, and I was like, so the dynamics of the family had changed as well. So then when I saw the girls, I remember thinking, we went to Churnside Park shopping centre, and the girls were like, they were excited, but they were nervous, and they were, and I didn't know how to act, actually. I'd lost all my parenting skills. I wasn't an authority in their life by any stretch. So when we got there, they started arguing, and I did not know for the life of me how to handle this. I didn't know what to do. They were annoying the hell out of me because I wasn't used to little kids arguing around me. I was used to this tough, environment where you could turn around and just go, shut up, go away, So it was just and when they used to come and see me on a visit, it was always best behaviour because we all loved each other and all that sort of stuff. This was so different and I didn't know what to do. I'd been out 4 hours or something with the girls anyway, start yelling at them, or it was just horrible. I didn't know what to do. And then I remember there were people sitting around this table and they were talking about things like, don't forget we're going to have that barbecue on Wednesday. Don't forget to stop at Bunnings and pick up the stuff for the lawnmower, and we're going to. And I remember sitting there thinking, God, I don't. That's someone living a life. I don't have that anymore. I don't have friends, and I don't know anyone that will go to a barbecue. I've got no need to go to Bunnings because I've got nothing, And I remembered and I remember thinking I was like a ghost walking around the outside of this place because I didn't fit in anywhere.
And you had every chance. Like you
Absolutely.
were educated. Yep. You weren't on drugs.
Yep.
You weren't.
Yep. I walked out to a job in a university.
You were educated.
Yep.
You were white. You were all of those things.
Yep. And I walked out to a job in a university. Which is I had a job. I was offered a job while I was in prison from Swinburne after I did my masters. So I had everything, but I just couldn't find where I fit. Where do I fit? And if you don't fit, it's just fundamentally the who you are. Where do you belong? It was just so goddamn difficult trying to work that out. And then the FPOS machines. I've got a lot of pride. The FPOS machines were different. So I was looking over this woman's shoulder trying to see how she was doing it, and she actually turned around and sort of had a go at me because she thought I was trying to and I'm thinking to myself, oh, terrific. I didn't even think of that. I'm going to be back into prison within 3 days, and I was like, no, but I didn't want to say I don't know how to use it.
Because I've been in jail for stealing money.
Totally. It was so goddamn hard. The one time I was able to assert myself or who I'd become was when we were sitting down having lunch with the kids. And we were just sitting there having a great old time, and this woman walked up and said, "Hi, Shannon, hi, Sarah, how you going?" And then made a point of just ignoring me, even though she knew who I was because everyone knew that I was obviously out of prison. It was a big deal and everyone wanted a part of the show. And she went to walk off. So I sort of said to the girls, just sit there for a minute. I went over to her and I said to her, I don't know who you are. I said, and more to the point, I don't care. I said, but they are my daughters and I am their mother and you won't change it. So next time I do see you, if you want to speak to my children, you will speak to me first or don't approach us at all. And that's one thing that I have an issue with is that if you've been to prison and you've done your time and you've done, and I've spoken at over 300, maybe 400 events in the community raising awareness. I've never charged, it's my being able to give back to the community and whatnot. I didn't appeal my sentence. I did it all in maximum security. I did, I assisted the community there. So I think that I've done what I needed to do. So to have then people feel that they can actually take ownership over my daughters is a huge trigger for me. So, I needed to set that straight, because while I'm wandering through trying to work out where I fit in life, the one thing I do know is that they are my daughters and someone I've never met before, I don't.
How long did it take to reestablish your relationship with the girls?
5 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
As long as you were away, it took that long
Yep.
again.
And, and sometimes, sometimes just to get settled back into the community is the same amount of time that you've been in prison. It takes that. It's such a big thing to particularly when you know that most people don't want you to be part of the community, just by and large, not maybe individually, but by and large, So, and that's what I always say is that the more the community, see, every woman gets out of prison, and again, they're broken women. My idea is that they come into prison, we work on them because they're doing their sentence. They're doing what has been told by the judge, by the community, by the judicial system. They're doing exactly that. So while they're in there, let's make it a win-win situation and start working on these women so that when they leave, they come out better people than when they went in, and maybe a little bit more healed, because they're going to come and live next door to you or somebody else or whatnot, and then they can become productive members of the community. It's a win-win situation as far as I'm concerned, and you invest in these people because they're not, most of them are not master criminals, because when they come out, if the community says, actually, we don't want you, even though you've done your time, why on earth would they bother abiding by the community's laws? If they're not part of that community, why feel an allegiance to do the right thing? And that, it's just such a simple process particularly about women in prison, because, most of them, just need, there's no point putting people in prison and then just letting them sit there and then expect a different outcome when they come out. That's just ludicrous. That is just stupid. And unfortunately, politics is that way a lot. No one wants to invest. We'll just build more prisons. Well, that's just ridiculous.
Your girls are in their 20s now. How's your
Sarah's
relationship?
21 tomorrow, and Shannon's 22. Fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. I'm very, very proud of the girls, and they, and they're very proud of me. They've told me so, and that's the one thing that I wanted. What other people and other people are going to have their opinions, and I absolutely respect that. That's not an issue. But it's the girls that I care about. So, so it's been a long, hard. I've had to be really, really patient with finding a place with them again, not enforcing, this, mummy's home, let's just disrupt their whole entire lives. So I couldn't be prouder of the girls. They're wonderful, good-hearted, law-abiding citizens.
Kerry, they're so lucky to have you, as were all the women in prison who benefited from your attention when you were there. What an extraordinary story, and I feel like I've learnt so much.
Thank you. Well,
much.
That's important, and I think people can change the way they think about things if they know how it actually works.
Thank you for listening to this episode of No Filter. Next week, for a complete change of pace, I am going to speak to a woman who life hacks her period. Oh my God, this will actually change your life. If you enjoyed this story and you are looking for what to listen to next, I have a suggestion for you. It's actually an episode of our family life podcast called This Glorious Mess, and this episode is actually called When Daddy Goes to Prison. And it's the most fascinating episode of the show. It's hosted by Holly Wainwright and Andrew Daddo, who host the show every week. And they speak to a guy called Scott Williams about the time that he had to tell his young son that he was going to prison. And I didn't get to talk to Kerry enough about her relationship with her daughters and what that was like, having that conversation so much. But the interview with Scott Williams is really interesting. You can find it in the Mamma Mia podcast app or wherever you listen to this show. We will also put a link in our show notes to this and to the extract from Kerry Tucker's book. This show has been produced by Liza Ratliff. I am Mia Friedman, and I will see you on mammamia.com.au.